Hello and welcome. You are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. US President Donald Trump says he could meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin very soon as Saudi-hosted peace talks approach. European leaders scramble to respond, preparing for an emergency summit in Paris after the US says they will not have a seat at negotiations. An Israeli airstrike in Gaza kills 3 police officers, with Hamas accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire. This comes as Israel receives a shipment of US heavy bombs approved by President Donald Trump. Lebanese official media reports 3 Israeli airstrikes in the east of the country, escalating cross-border hostilities. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's chief calls for broader participation in the funeral of slain leader Nasrallah, increasing concerns over further unrest. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, M23 rebels seized the strategic city of Bukavu as principal authorities confirm the withdrawal of Congolese troops. The rapid offense fuels fears of a broader regional conflict. A Canadian warship, H.M.C.S Ottawa, sailed through the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's defense ministry said the ship had sailed in a northerly direction, adding that Taiwanese forces are monitoring the vessel. While Taiwan welcomed the sailing, Chinese military condemned the move and said that it undermines peace in the sensitive waterway. The People's Liberation Army also deployed naval and air assets to monitor and track the vessel's movements. This comes a few days after US Navy ships made a similar mission in Taiwanese waters. Meanwhile, the Russian Navy's landing ship conducted artillery firing drills in the Sea of Japan. A Russian news agency reported that the exercises were carried out as part of the planned combat training activities of the Russian Pacific Fleet. Japan has not yet responded to the Russian Navy drills. For more on this discussion, we are joined by Ross Feingold, political risk analyst located in Taiwan, and also Andrea Lucidi, war reporter located in Russia. Ross Feingold, I wanted to come to you first on this question. I was wondering, given China's condemnation of the Western naval vessel in the Taiwan Strait, does the US see these missions as essential for regional security, or are they unnecessarily provocative, would you say?
Well, certainly the United States and its allies don't view this as provocative at all. They view it as something that's permitted under international law. In addition, it shows continued support for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, which is something that these countries, the United States, Canada, UK, France, which also periodically sail through the Taiwan Strait, peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is or support for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is the official policy of all of these countries. So these are going to continue, and every time that it occurs, China will complain, and the complaints will come from official spokespersons of different Chinese government agencies, including the military. But those complaints are not going to stop the United States, Canada, the UK, France, and potentially other countries from sailing through the Taiwan Strait periodically. Really, what's the thing to watch here is, now that we have a new president and a new administration in the United States, going forward, how often will the US Navy do this, as well as other allied navies?
Andrea Lucidi, do you think, does Russia view Western naval operations in the Taiwan Strait as a provocation against China, and should Moscow take a stronger support of Beijing, do you think?
At this moment, the attention of the Russian Federation for the Pacific scenario is not very high, but of course, any American naval activity or any military activity in the Pacific zone from the US can be observed by Moscow, or at least with suspect. But now, from Moscow, in my perspective, I can tell you that maybe the new presidential administration in Washington can can give to Moscow more trust. Can be for Moscow can be easy have more trust in the U.S. now because they appear at least more available for a dialogue between Russia and Washington. For this reason, I think we cannot expect any hard declaration from Moscow about this U.S. activity in the Pacific zone.
Yes. Ross Feingold, as Russia conducts military drills in the Sea of Japan, is there concern that Moscow and Beijing are coordinating something to challenge the US's influence in the Indo-Pacific?
It's a great concern to the United States as well as its allies in the region, such as South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. It's obviously it's not going to be something that the United States welcomes or wants to see, but the reality is also obvious at the same time, and that's that China and Russia have grown closer in recent years, including in the military space and including things like joint exercises, even if this exercise happened to be a unilateral Russian exercise. But the possibility of joint exercises again between China and Russia, which have happened with increasing frequency in recent years, that's going to happen again in the coming months. And then it will be up to the Trump administration and allied countries to determine how to respond probably with additional high-profile sailings or air passage by military assets of the United States. So ultimately, we're probably going to see increased military activity in the Pacific in the coming months.
Andrea Lucidi, staying on these Russian military drills in the Sea of Japan, how do these exercises fit into Russia's broader strategy in the Indo-Pacific, and should Japan see Russia as a threat?
The Japan is a very close ally to the U.S. and in this moment, Russia and North Korea are very close relationship. For this reason, maybe this Russian naval activity in the Pacific region, in the Sea of Japan, would be a message for Japan for say, look, we are not very active here, but we are existing also here, and our fleet in the Pacific is existing. So we are ready to defend our interests in this zone. But of course, we need to think also about the situation in China, between China and Taiwan, because it's a very complicated situation at the diplomatic stage, because the U.S., Russia, and practically all the Security Council of the United Nations agree with the One China policy. So officially, they don't recognize Taiwan as a state, but practically all nations have a relationship with Taiwan as a state. And of course, for Japan, it's crucial to have good relations with Taiwan. And if this relationship will be dangerous for China, or if China will be not satisfied about this, can be a problem for North Korea, for Russia, because China is a strategic partner for both, for Russia and for North Korea. So, in my opinion, the Russian Federation with this naval activity will send a message to the allied of the US and say we existing and we will protect our interests in this zone.
Yes. We will now move on to a different story, and we will now look at some news updates about the truce talks in Russia. US President Donald Trump has said he could meet Russian President Vladimir Putin very soon. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the specifics of the talks, including the makeup of the Russian delegation, had not yet been finalized. Rubio has also assured any real negotiations will have Ukrainian involvement. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia is only pushing for a ceasefire to replenish its battle-stricken forces for future attacks. He also stated that Vladimir Putin should never be trusted. Ambassador H.M.C.S Ottawa, I wanted to come to you first. What do you think about this meeting between Apologies. I wanted to move to you, Ross Feingold, and talk about this potential meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It's supposed to be coming soon. Is that right?
And the thing to keep in mind here is that President Trump, during the election campaign over the course of 2024, he said he would bring peace on the first day. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but it certainly means that he's going to continue to pursue it. So, to be fair to President Trump, he's simply making good on a campaign promise of his. Obviously, there's some concern among European allies of the United States, and also concern among Ukraine, with the Ukraine president and government, that Trump and Putin will make a deal without consulting these other key stakeholders. Secretary of State Rubio has tried to make it clear that these other stakeholders, like Europeans, like Ukraine, will be consulted. And I think we should take Secretary of State Rubio at his word. But it's also probably still early days in this process. We don't even have, as you said, we don't even have a firm makeup of the delegations or when these meetings are actually going to occur. So there's still a lot more work to be done. But the key thing here, again, I think, is that President Trump is following through on his campaign promise.
Andrea, I wanted to come to you next. President Zelensky claims that Russia only wants a ceasefire to regroup for future attacks. How does Moscow respond to that accusation?
Moscow say that it's not interesting to make future attack against Ukraine, but if the Russian Federation can complete their objective in the special military operation. So that means that Moscow refused any agreement that can permit to Ukraine joining the NATO and to have military capabilities for be dangerous for Russian Federation. And of course, Moscow continued to talk about the denazification of Ukrainian policy and Ukrainian politicians, because from the Russian side, from the Russian perspective, it's very, very bad for their historical memory that the Western media give space for Ukrainian soldiers that have neo-Nazis or neo-fascist patch or symbols in their uniform. And this is a very important point for them.
Ross Feingold, originally, obviously, it was believed that Europe would not be associated with these peace negotiations whatsoever. Secretary Rubio has backtracked on that and stated that the real negotiations will include Ukraine and Europe. Do you think that this will do you think that this will eventually happen once these initial peace talks are done in Saudi Arabia with Trump and Putin?
We should take Secretary Rubio at his word, and if he says the Europeans are going to be involved, I think we have to be fair to Secretary Rubio and expect him to carry through on that commitment. And there's also another very important element to this, which is there going to be a pan-European peacekeeping force that's deployed along the front line between Russia and Ukraine? So if that's going to become a reality, and there's been a lot of talk about that in recent days, if there is going to be a pan-European peacekeeping force that is deployed to the front, then of course the Europeans are going to have to be consulted about this, hopefully earlier rather than later, and they're going to have to start making the commitment, whether that's military resources or financial resources. They're going to have to start making that commitment, because if there is a multinational peacekeeping force, it's going to be composed of Europeans. The likelihood that the United States will contribute soldiers to an on-the-ground peacekeeping force is probably very low at the moment, and President Trump is probably not supportive of that. And President Trump is going to say, hey, to the European countries, hey, all of you, this is in Europe. You want to keep the peace, you should deploy your own militaries to the front line.
Andrea, my final question. If Europe and Ukraine are going to be included in these so-called real negotiations, what role does Russia believe that they should play?
Well, in my opinion, Ukraine and the European Union cannot have a separate negotiation. The real peace agreement, if we will see a peace agreement, will be between the US the Russian Federation and Ukraine. But Ukraine is a passive actor in this process, unfortunately, and the European Union is completely excluded from this process because the new administration of the United States is thinking that the European Union is not maybe so important for take a part in the negotiation, or their role is so marginal in the help in the military and economic help to Ukraine. We need to think that the US helped Ukraine with more than 500 billions of dollars. That is a gigant amount of money, and of course Europe alone cannot support Ukraine for a amount of this money. And maybe for this reason, the new presidential administration of Washington chose to have to exclude the European Union from the negotiation. But it's important also to say that Moscow will not accept any closing of the conflict. They will accept only a peace agreement that can be satisfying for them. And that means that in this peace agreement, Ukraine needs to accept the withdrawal of the armed force from every region that Moscow reclaimed as Russian territory, and the demilitarization of Ukrainian state.
Andrea Lucidi and Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. We move on to some more news updates from across the world. Saturday's stabbing case in Austria that killed a 14-year-old and left 5 others injured was an Islamist attack, as per the Austrian officials. A 23-year-old asylum seeker who was detained at the scene has been charged with murder and attempted murder. Watch the latest in this report.
A stabbing that left a teenager dead and 5 other people injured in southern Austria was an Islamist attack, the Interior Minister said on Sunday, with a 23-year-old Syrian asylum seeker held.
Es handelt sich hier um einen islamistischen Anschlag mit IS-Bezug. Das ist der Stand der bisherigen Ermittlungen. Ein islamistischer Anschlag mit IS-Bezug eines Attentäters, der innerhalb kürzester Zeit sich offensichtlich, so der Stand der Ermittlungen, über das Internet online radikalisiert hat.
During a raid of the suspect's apartment, police said they found clear evidence of Islamist radical thought, such as his flags on the wall. No weapons or other dangerous items were found, police said, adding the suspect was under investigation for murder and attempted murder charges. In the attack in the center of the city in Carinthia state, the suspect went after passers-by with a folding knife. The suspect is an asylum seeker with a valid residence permit and no criminal record, as per the police. The village attack came just 2 days after a suspected Afghan asylum seeker rammed a car into people in the city of Munich in neighboring Germany, killing a 2-year-old girl and her mother and wounding dozens others. German police said the 24-year-old Afghan may have had Islamist extremist motives for the attack. Following the attack, at the scene of the crime on a shopping street, residents were seen placing candles, while some hugged mourning the lives lost. Austria hosts a large Syrian refugee population of almost 100,000. Austria's Interior Ministry has now said it's preparing an orderly repatriation and deportation program to Syria. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates from the world of business. South Korea has banned new downloads of China's DeepSeek AI chatbot. This decision comes from the country's personal data protection watchdog. The government agency has stated that the AI model will only be made available again to South Korean users. This will occur after improvements and remedies are made. These changes will ensure the AI model complies with the country's personal data protection laws. Jonathan Reynolds has said that imposing US tariffs on UK steel would be negative for both countries. He stated that the UK and the US have a mutual interest in negotiating an exemption from President Donald Trump's proposed 25% import tax. This tax could come into force in March. Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke at a symposium attended by business leaders, including Alibaba CEO founder Jack Ma. This comes as Beijing grapples with a slowing economy and growing tensions with the US. And other private business leaders at the symposium included Huawei founder Ren Zhifei, Xiaomi's Lei Jun, BYD's Fang Cheifu, Unitree's Wang Xingxing, and Catal's Robin Zeng. Oil prices were little changed as investors focused on development regarding a potential Russia-Ukraine peace deal. This deal could ease sanctions disrupting global supply flows. Brent crude futures were up at 7 cents at $75 per barrel. Meanwhile, US West Texas Intermediate crude remained stable at $71 per barrel. Iraq's central bank has banned 5 more local banks from engaging in US dollar transactions. This action follows meetings with US Treasury officials aimed at combating money laundering, dollar smuggling, and other violations. A tragic incident has unfolded in the Indian capital of New Delhi. At least 18 people lost their lives when surging crowds scrambled to catch trains to the world's largest religious gathering, the Kumbh Mela. Here's what we know so far about the tragedy.
At least 18 people died during a stampede at a railway station in India's capital late Saturday. The tragic incident unfolded as and when surging crowds scrambled to catch trains to the world's largest religious gathering, the Kumbh Mela. The Kumbh Mela attracts tens of millions of Hindu faithful every 12 years to the northern city of Prayagraj. As per reports, the ones dead are mostly women and children. Following the incident, the Railways Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw said that a high-level inquiry has been ordered into the causes of the accident. The Prime Minister of India posted on X saying, "My thoughts are with all those who have lost their loved ones. I pray that the injured have a speedy recovery." The opposition parties in India have criticised the travel arrangements in place for the mega festival. The 6-week Kumbh Mela is the single biggest milestone on the Hindu religious calendar, and officials said around 500 million devotees have already visited the festival since it began last month. Reportedly, 30 people were killed in another stampede at the holy confluence of the Ganges, Yamuna and the mythical Saraswati rivers last month. Bureau Report, NewsX.
And that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.